in talking to people, I found that a lot of people are apathetic because caring about politics hurts. It leads to frustration.
Right.
And other people are interested a bit, but are pretty ignorant about issues, because when they do learn about issues, it's extremely frustrating. Because on just about any issue, there are interesting possibilities, including a lot of them have, appeal to majorities of Americans. And so on People Count, they'll be able to, interact simply with an issue, maybe their top issue, and, see that it goes okay, and start seeing what people want, and start, grading some reports. So they'll be able to interact without that frustration, or without that level of frustration.
Welcome to Bridging the Potential, intergenerational conversations that change the world. This is Aaron Johnson, founding member of Living the Potential Network's Youth Advisory Council, with a question for you. What happens when you bridge the experience, education, and expertise of an elder with the curiosity, energy, and innate wisdom of a youth? It's simple. Everyone grows and the world changes for the better. One conversation, one connection, and one collaboration at a time. Today's podcast is no different. Renee Beth connected me with Rand Strauss, who is a Stanford-educated software engineer, problem solver, and the founder of peoplecount.org, an up-and-coming site that enables voters and politicians to work together to create a constructive, democratic political system serving all voters. I think you will enjoy our conversation about how People Count can co-create a political dialogue that establishes trust in our governmental institutions. And my favorite part of this podcast was when Rand shared his own story of being resigned when it came to politics, and especially how his vision for People Count could realistically impact our political discourse and promote higher electoral participation.
Hello, this is Renee Beth Poindexter. I am founder of Living the Potential Network, and I am your host for today's podcast. After I wrote the book, Living the Potential, Engaging the Wisdom of Our Youth to Save the World, I set out to find ways to engage people where they could actually hear what the youth have to say. And that's what this podcast is all about. I love these conversations because after listening to the youth dreams and visions and concerns, we connect them with a mentor, an elder, who has experience and wisdom to share in the area that the youth is most interested in, so that there can be a learning and receiving of the innovative side of the youth, and at the same time sharing that amazing experience. And it's reciprocal learning at its best. I always leave these conversations inspired, and I think you will too. Today, we have two fabulous guests. Our mentor today is Rand Strauss, and he is a Stanford-educated expert and problem solver and software engineer. And in his 40-year career, he has created reliable solutions in complex systems for a wide range of organizations, from startups to NASA. Wow. Today, he's the founder of peoplecount.org. Now, this is a program that enables voters and politicians to work together to create a constructive, democratic political system serving all voters. Let me say that again. Peoplecount.org is enabling voters and politicians to work together to create a constructive and democratic political system serving all voters. I'd say that's something we definitely need today. Politicians will be able to be free from the influence of money, as well as independent of the parties. And voters will be able to hold politicians accountable even after elections. So Rand is our mentor today, and he's going to be engaging with Aaron Johnson, who is a young or should I say, inspired project manager, business owner, writer, author, 19 years old, and a co-founder of the Youth Advisory Council for Living the Potential Network. So it's just great to have you both here today. I'm going to start with you, Rand. So fabulous, your vision and how you came to it. Why don't we just start with, 40 years as a software engineer solving problems, and then you design people count. How did that all come about? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
So the first 30 years as a software engineer was just a regular career. I was a kid in college. I was at the University of Washington, and finding that I wasn't meeting a lot of interesting people, which was mainly me. But then I transferred into Stanford, and it was wonderful, opened my eyes. I discovered computers and programming. They actually didn't have a computer science undergraduate degree back in 1980, but I did an applied math degree and then stayed on for a master's in computer science. And I just sort of fell into it. When I was 28, I took the Landmark Forum, which is a self-help and personal growth course. And my eyes were opened up to all new sides of life. I got married after that. I have 2 kids in graduate school, and continued to work as a software engineer in all sorts of positions. And it dawned on me later that what I really loved about programming was problem solving. I excelled in that in school, and I have lots of stories, but it was really spending time on a tough problem that I loved. And then about 20 years ago, we had the 9/11, and Bush started wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and destabilized the Middle East. To my wife and I, they were just really obvious mistakes. And while I emailed or contacted my senators and representative, it didn't amount to anything. And then 10 years ago, so back to when I was 28 and took that course, I took courses for just a few years before I went on and got married. So 10 years ago, I happened to, or about 13 years ago, I started taking courses again. And during 9/11, no, let's see. I'm sorry, it was about 13 years ago. So that was like 7 years after 9/11. I started taking courses again. And then in 2011, I took this interesting course, a 10-month course over 5 weekends of looking at life newly. And we talked about our way of being. And we didn't talk about politics, but I realized that I was resigned about politics. And, being a problem solver, I knew that resignation made me part of the problem. And I didn't want to be part of the problem of politics. As it made me part of the environment that allowed the problems to be. So I gave up my resignation. This was in the beginning of 2011. And I looked at politics newly, and I was interested in, what I had missed, political developments on the internet. And there wasn't too much.
Yeah.
And
Can I ask you a quick question? Can I ask you a quick question? Because
Sure.
when you say you were resigned about politics, that you had a resignation about it, what does that mean?
So back in 2001, it was in 2002, it was frustrating that I couldn't get some of my wisdom to my senators and representatives. I couldn't make a difference. It seemed like there were some much better decisions that could be made, and it was very frustrating. And, first thousands and then tens of thousands of people died. Many more were injured. Millions were thrown out of their homes. It was upsetting. And like most people, I don't want to think about that stuff. So I shut down those emotions. And
so when you say you were resigned, it was kind of like, you're just one person. You can't really make a difference. The system's operating without you. And you're just resigned to that. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, that there was nothing I could do.
Right. And from that place, something else started. When you recognized that resignation, it became kind of a moment. We call it an epiphany, right? That started the ball rolling. I just wanted to make sure that we mark that out, because a lot of people are thinking like, well, what is resignation? What am I resigned about? What difference can I make? Am I just going to complain about it, or am I going to do something about it? Right?
Right. In the midst of that intense frustration, I turned away, tried to recoup, but unconsciously I had sort of shut myself down. And it turns out, I've learned since that, when we shut down our emotions about one thing, we tend to shut down our emotions about everything. So I let go of my resignation and got involved and did research.
Right.
But it turned out there was still no good way to be a responsible citizen, other than voting. And in this course, we were talking about ourselves and language and what conversations were new. And we were looking at how much of what we say daily was old, sort of recycled. So we were looking for ways to have a new conversation. So I started asking people, what would it be like if we had a political system we loved? And so for 2 months, I started having these new conversations with people, and people were taken aback, didn't know what to say. And it was real clear that this was sort of a blind spot in our culture. And we didn't get too much out of it, but out of having these conversations over and over, I saw that there was a lot of potential. A lot was possible if we would just design the system we wanted instead of, being resigned about it, as most of society seemed to be. And for the next 2 months, I started having a conversation with people about, would it be worthwhile to fix our political system? I mean, I had no hope or thought of fixing it, actually, but it was also a new conversation. So I did that as part of the homework. And at the end of that, and people pretty much said yes. Most people were thinking that it was too big to fix, that it was, it's a huge institution or a collection of institutions. And then after that, I wondered, well, what's wrong with politics? And so, being an expert problem solver, I did a problem solving exercise. And in the beginning, mostly that's trying to understand what goes on. I mean, in the beginning, there were all sorts of people to blame. I just talked to a lot of people, and most people in America seem to think that most politicians are corrupt. And then there are lobbyists to blame, and then there's the other party, and then there's my party as well. I mean,
yeah.
And I knew that as long as people were to blame, I was thinking inside the box. And so as I delved further and saw what was happening, finally things gelled, that I started seeing that everybody's doing what looks appropriate to them. Everybody's trying their hardest. Some are in politics are trying hard to serve people. there are a few that are trying hard to serve themselves. But as I saw that, I began to see that actually, I mean, in a sense, the system was working. There was no part of it that was broken, even though when we look at it from the outside, it seems that every part is broken, every part from voters to voting and elections to, the political discourse. There are problems in every arena, which is really, or every aspect, which is really strange for a system to be that broken. And so I kept looking, and I saw that for democracy to work reliably, politicians need to be accountable to voters. And they weren't. I mean, I thought to myself, if I were a politician, how would I deliver accountability? And actually, I knew from a course 30 years ago that, or in the beginning when I started taking courses, that accountability is the responsibility to give a full account for what's going on. And I defined it even further, more rigorously, that accountability is a relationship. So if I'm accountable to you, yes, I need to answer your questions and give you a full account, but I'm accountable to you for something, which is like in a employee-manager relationship, where I pretty much do what you tell me, according to the job spec. And that there was no way to enforce that relationship. We just didn't have that. And I knew that relationships mainly consist of communication, role-based communication. So there was no way for you, the voter, to tell the politician what you want, no way to tell each other what you want so you could be the manager together, and no way to hold me to it. And that usually that happens, that is, a manager holds an employee to what they're supposed to do with their judgment, approval or disapproval. And it's that communication, I've been working for 30 years, that, gives the employee the guidance. And we didn't have that, but at the same time, that was all communication, which, we've had breakthroughs with on the web.
Right.
And so I started to see that something new was possible.
That's amazing. So what I love about your process, and so people listening to this, and I'm sure specifically for Aaron, this idea of being a problem solver and knowing what questions to ask along the way. It's like you didn't have the answer, and it was okay that you didn't have the answer, because a lot of people don't start a project until they have it all figured out. But you've got to have these guiding questions, and each question you ask led to the next, that led to the next, that led to the next.
Yeah,
So this idea about accountability and the connection to communication has to be two-way for the system to actually be upgraded. There has to be a better communication than the way we've had it. So were those the seeds for your peoplecount.org? Is that how it came to be? And if so, how could you describe how that came together and where you are with the project now?
Yeah, about problem solving, there's this thing that's said nowadays that everybody's a problem solver. And while it's true, that's why I call myself an expert problem solver. And what makes me an expert are two things. One is, a background of solving lots and lots of puzzles in school, as well as problems at work. But the other is that I can sit with a problem for days or weeks or months and get it to gel and see what's going on. Part of my research was looking at books about what's wrong with politics. And there are these surface level problems, and people dive beneath it and pick something like one book is on how we've sorted ourselves into the two parties. So the Conservative Party is full of, is purely made up of conservatives, and the Liberal Party is purely made up of liberals or progressives, and that makes the groups more divisive. Another book says that the problem is that there's not much competition in elections, and yet beneath those are deeper problems, and as I said, all of those seem to be caused by this lack of accountability, and even the money's huge power in elections and in stopping or allowing legislation. So it's going deep into it and understanding everything. And often that's difficult, especially in a big problem like politics. I mean,
right.
I
can picture this big mind map with all these arrows going lots of different places, but coming to the same issue about accountability and communication and having more voices be heard.
Yeah. So part of the problem solving is I just happen to have a mind that does it well. And some of it I know, but a lot of it I don't know. It's just a God-given thing. Thank God I have a talent.
Yeah, exactly. But you're leveraging this talent as a problem solver to something that's really needed today more so than ever.
But what I was going to say is that the other part of it is that I have high standards, that a big part of problem solving is checking everything. And that's what, we tend not to do in simple everyday problems. It's not as necessary. We just wait till we feel good about it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it's kind of like looking at the long-term effect of choices and decisions made by looking at all aspects, let's say 360 degrees on a circle. And I would like you to speak just a little bit about how all this has come into peoplecount.org, because then we're going to open. I'd love Aaron to come in, and I know he's got some really good questions related to your work. So could you give a brief description you've given us the background on why would something like peoplecount.org be needed? You kind of got your thought process. Now what? What is peoplecount.org, and what can people learn about it, being a part of the solution moving forward?
If you liked what you heard and want to listen to the rest of this incredible conversation, you can do so by visiting livingthepotential.com/membership and create a completely and forever free account with us. And if you're interested, check out the first 2 chapters of Renee Beth's book, Living the Potential, Engaging the Wisdom of Our Youth to Save the World, which you can also find at livingthepotential.com/book. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time.